everybody, and welcome to episode number 13 of the Clarity Project podcast. I am your host, 𝗦𝗢𝗓𝗦. For this episode number 13, it is going to be like our normal episode wherein I'm going to read and reflect on my notes. But before we start with episode number 13, I just like to add a little bit something about episode number 12. If you've seen episode number 12, you know that we read a quote from Paulo Coelho that goes out like this. It's somewhere along the lines of someday you're going to wake up and then one day you're going to realize that you're not going to be able to do the things that you've always wanted to do, or that you're unable to do the things that you've always wanted to do. Another thing about that, we've also talked about Denzel Washington and his quote about being in your deathbed and seeing the ghost of who you could have been. But it's also about not only the versions of the realities of who you are, but also the versions of reality of the people around you, the versions and the reality of the people that you are with. Wishing that, probably you should have not associated yourself with this kind of a person. Maybe you could have gone on with this kind of a career. Maybe you could have gone to a different path in your life, or maybe you're doing a different kind of a job, right? Or a different kind of a passion, or things of that nature. That being said, let's get into episode number 13. Now, the reason why I mentioned episode number 12 is because I think episode number 13 is going to be a little bit related to that. That being said, let's move over to episode number 13 and let me read the note for you. So, if you can do something and wait for 1 year, you will be making a ton of money. You will not be doing anything financially for the rest of your life. Not super rich, but enough. Let me repeat that. If you can do something and wait for 1 year, you'll be making a ton of money. You will not be doing anything financially for the rest of your life. Not super rich, but enough. And then it is followed by this passage. If you can wait a decade, you're going to be above the 1%. If you can wait a lifetime, then you can change the world. Delay your ask, just play the long game. Run a marathon at a sprinter's pace. Success is going from failure to failure without loss in enthusiasm. And then there's a note here. It says that I can't believe I learned this lesson during Business Talks with Carl, that I wonder where I will be if I stayed consistent for 3 to 5 years from now, and yet I still did and not do it. So let me try and reflect on this note. So, before getting into this, let's just establish the reality here. That not everybody who pursued their dreams 100% for 1 year, for a decade, and a lifetime got rewarded for it. Just look at, again, one of my examples from one of the reels that I did was Vincent van Gogh, who didn't really get any critical acclaim, or that he was not really recognized as an artist during his lifetime. It is only after the fact, years after his death, when he was recognized as this great artist. His whole life, he's been ridiculed and is probably more famous for the things that he's doing outside of his work and art rather than his art itself. And so, yes, this passage is optimistic. It is, as you would say, a romanticized version. Ideally, this is what you want to do. Ideally, this is what's going to happen. If you give it your 100%, if you give it your all, if you wait, if you're just patient enough for 1 year or a decade or a lifetime, then you will be rewarded for it. But let's get to the bottom of this, right? Let's get real for a second and realize that sometimes it doesn't work out that way. Sometimes you give it 100% and you're still not rewarded for it. Again, we see great artists that are rewarded years after their death, but that's just one example. In a way, Vincent was lucky because someone got to recognize his work, even though he was not alive to see it. But how about the countless of artists that died down, who went 100% of their dreams and didn't even get the recognition that they deserve? even after their death. How about those people? Of course, you're not going to think of anybody else because, well, that's the point. They're unknown. Nobody knows their name. Nobody knows their work. They were never recognized and they will never be recognized ever. That's the scary part. But every time that I read something like this, of you going all in with your dreams, of you, living this artist life, of doing the things that you love, I'm always reminded by the story of Jim Carrey's dad. I don't know if you know the story by now, but for those who don't know the story, basically Jim Carrey's dad was an accountant, right? But before being an accountant, Jim Carrey's dad was a musician. I don't know, I don't remember what type of musician it was, but his dad was a musician. He was passionate about it, and he was all about music. But at some point, Jim Carrey's dad had to let go of his passion and his love for music to secure a much more, secure job, to have much more financial stability. And so he dropped music and pursued accountancy. And that's where he became an accountant. But a few years after that, the firm or the company that his dad was working for closed down or went bankrupt or something. And Jim Carrey and their family had to be homeless for quite some time and as a result of this. One thing that Jim Carrey realized from that story is that you can fail from doing the things that you hate. And so you might as well fail doing the things that you love. That's the kind of philosophy, that's the kind of sentiment that every time that I hear something like this that's too good to be true, if you just stick around for it for 1 year, stick around it for a decade, sometimes even if you're not rewarded for it, the act itself is the reward. Sometimes even if you're not being rewarded for it until you die, or all of these unknown anonymous artists that we never knew about, at least I guess we could imagine that they enjoyed it while it lasted. I guess at least while they were doing it, it brought them something more than recognition. It brought them something more than money or fame or any kind of critical acclaim or public acclaim for that matter. But at that moment, at least they were doing what they love to do rather than living a long life, slaving away, doing something that they don't like to do. So I guess that's kind of the counter argument to this, right? Even though that this sounds like too good to be true, that it's not going to happen, at least we can think of a reality wherein they're happy. I think that's a little bit more Sisyphean, a little bit more Albert Camus, but at least we can imagine that they were happy. And I guess at the grand scheme of things, that's what matters. Were you able to live this world the way that you want to live this world? Are you happy while you were here? And at the short time that you are here, did you occupy yourself doing the things that you want to do, the things that you're passionate about, the things that you love? Or did you live a long life doing something that you hate? Did you live a long life playing it safe and not really doing anything significant with your life, things that you've always wanted to do with your life? I guess that's what it is. Going back again to one of the notes here, I said, I can't believe I learned this lesson during Business Talks with Carl. For those who don't know, before the Clarity Project came about, I first did a series of live streams in Instagram during the pandemic. While everybody was doing whatever during the pandemic, right? Of course, a lot of people died in the pandemic tragically. A lot of people became like broken homes and broken families because of the pandemic. But this unprecedented time, everybody was preoccupied doing whatever, right? Or discovering a passion or learning something, right? Some people learned to cook. Some people got into fitness. For me, it was films. But at some point, and I guess this is a whole podcast in itself, although I've said the stories numerous times over the IG lives, I thought to myself that I need to be able to improve, right? Because at that time I was still a student, and I just didn't see how an online setup is good, right, in terms of learning, but I can do more. And so I challenged myself to do a series of live streams in Instagram, and that's where I practice my public speaking and my speaking in general. And so Business Talks with Carl is exactly that. I do a series of IG live streams almost every night, and I talk about business because, well, I majored and I was in business school. So it's a kind of a hitting two birds with one stone. I'm practicing my English, I'm practicing my communication, but at the same time, I'm also learning and discussing business concepts. So that's how it came about. Before the Clarity Project, it was Business Talks with Carl up until I realized that during the episodes and the late episodes of Business Talks with Carl, I found myself talking about other things other than business. And so, okay, this is not just Business Talks with Carl. Let me think of something that is much more broad because that's where I'm interested in. And at that time, it was clarity. I was all about clarity. I'm just fascinated by the idea of clarity, of having this thought in your head and then seeing for the first time ever as if it was a eureka moment, and it would completely change the course of your life because it's like a eureka moment. Once you know what you should do, that gives you the motivation to be able to continue it. Once you get the clarity that this is how you should live your life, or at least you have the clarity that this is where you should be heading to, then that gives you the motivation, that gives you movement, that gives you the freedom and the courage to be able to go to that path. But again, that's a different episode. But that's just a little bit of a history on what Business Talks with Carl is, if you're not aware of it. So, going back, I learned this lesson during the Business Talks with Carl that I wonder where I will be if I am consistent for 3 to 5 years from now, and yet I still did not do it. Basically, the thought there was I was able to achieve relative success even if I was 100, even if I wasn't 100% at that point. I wasn't 100% in pursuing my goals. I was half-hearted in my efforts. I was half-hearted in my dreams. I was not going full 100% at it. And so I had a little funny thought, and I guess it makes sense. I don't know if it's gonna make sense to you or not, but I guess it makes sense because at that point, again, I was able to achieve relative success even if I was not 100%, even if I did not have clarity. So this thought experiment happened, and where I thought to myself, I wonder where I will be 3 to 5 years from now if I go 100%. I wonder where I will be 3 to 5 years from now if I had clarity, if I go all in. Because again, back then I wasn't all in, but I was still relatively successful. But now it's a good thought experiment to think where would I be if I give it 100% for 3 to 5 years. And the funny thing about this is that, and I said here is that I learned this lesson years ago, and yet I still did not do it. And now, to be completely honest with you guys, I haven't been 100% with my dreams. Even though I had these lessons, even though I had this realization, even though I had this reality before. If you would think about it, it's the pandemic, right? 2020 or 2021. So it's about 3 to 4 years ago. 3 to 4 years ago, I already knew this. And yet, I'm still not acting on it. I'm still not 100% on my dreams. That's the reality. That's the sad reality. But I guess, even though I wasn't able to go 100% with it, I am now at a greater capacity than I was with before. Probably because before I was a student and so my time was preoccupied doing something else. Another thing that I'd like to point out is that now I have more free time because I graduated and that I have more time with the Clarity Project. A lot of people have been like messaging me, saying that, you're all in with your project. I kind of envy that, or that I'm kind of inspired by that because you're all in. You're very serious about the Clarity Project. And the thing is, yeah, I'm serious about a clarity project, but to what extent, right? If I'm really obsessed with a clarity project, I would imagine myself going in clarity project every day, 24/7, 365 days a year. But no, unfortunately, in the creative field, you cannot do that. And that's one of my realization also. You cannot go 100% if you're in a creative field. It's not like sports, or it's not like any other field wherein you just not think about it, right? You go there. As I'm saying this, I am reminded of a YouTube video on how an artist turns pro. This is a counter argument to where Charles Bukowski, I believe that video started off with the Charles Bukowski quote, and Charles Bukowski is talking about you should only be writing, you should only be doing creative things if you can't absolutely do anything else but that, if you're not absolutely compelled to do that thing. So it's a counter argument to that. If you haven't seen that video, go search it up on YouTube. It's called I don't know. I actually don't know the title, but I guess it's somewhere along the lines of how an artist turns pro, and you're going to see the whole argument there. You're going to see the whole video essay there on what they think about it. So basically, what it says is that an artist doesn't wait for inspiration. An artist just do. That's what separates an artist versus a professional. A professional does the job anyways. A professional doesn't wait for inspiration to happen. An artist breaks down, works around, and creates the inspiration until it finally reveals itself through force. And as an artist, of course, this seems to be like a really difficult thing to do, because one of the magics of being an artist is that when you're in that zone, wherein you're in your flow state, wherein everything just comes out naturally, and you just can't miss, because you're enveloped in this kind of emotions. And non-artists probably have something like that similar to them, in sports. Maybe it's in your different field, but basically, it's when you feel like it's so effortless, right? It's so effortless, and you're there's really no better way of saying it than you are in your zone. You are in your flow state. And during this flow state, during this spark of innovation, the spark of inspiration, it all comes out naturally. It all comes out effortlessly. And as an artist, this is such a high that we're always chasing, that when it happens, it feels so good. But whenever we are forced to do something as an artist, whenever we are forced to write, whenever we are forced to create an art, maybe draw or paint, or probably sing or dance or whatever, every time what we are forced into doing something, we find that the result is not that good, because we're doing it out of the act of desperation, out of the act of force, rather than just letting it be. This video talks about how that's exactly what you should be feeling. This video talks about that you should not wait for inspiration to happen, that you should do the work before the inspiration happen. And yet, sometimes I feel like, yeah, I should just do that, wait for inspiration to happen. But sometimes, without inspiration, sometimes without the passion, without the motivation, we just find ourselves unable to do. We just find ourselves unable to work. We just find ourselves unable to produce. So that's kind of the catch-22 here. Yes, being a professional is just getting up and trying to do it regardless of what you feel, regardless of whether you're inspired or not. But at the same time, we as artists knows that our best work comes from inspiration. Our best work comes from great emotion. Our best work comes from great motivation and great reason and great meaning, great why, great purpose. And every time that we are forced to do something anywhere below that or beneath that, then we find ourselves and our work to be second rate. That's it. So, yes, I guess that's a dilemma. I mean, it's hard to go all in a craft wherein if you go all in, it's easy to burn out if you're doing something that you hate. But it's also true that even doing the things that you love, you can burn out creatively. Because in order for you to stay creative, in order for you to maintain clarity, in order for you to maintain a sense of vision, is that you gotta step away or step back every now and then, which I talked about in episode number 12. That being said, I guess that's the podcast. And yeah, thank you for listening. This has been episode number 13. Again, what I've always been saying previous episode. If you watch this as a whole, if you watch this in snippets, I'd like to be able to thank you, and I'll see you again in the next one. Thank you and goodbye.